Talk about the dog with the proverbial bone, and what better example than Albert Burgess. Where are you, Albert? Well, come on, get yourself up here. 2 years ago, Albert was knocking on the door of the police stations on his tog, reporting treason, and they were laughing at him. If you go into a police station now, at that stage of the game, of course, you wouldn't even have the word treason on the screen in the police station. People had hardly heard of the word. There's no doubt about it, they know about the word treason now. And a lot of police stations, if you actually go in and they type up the word treason, it's there. That's all as a consequence of this man, Albert Burgess.
Thank you very much. I actually believe in God. And my son went up to, we bought on the internet, he bought a car up in Cambridge, and he doesn't drive, so he sent me up to Cambridge on the coach to pick up his car. I could say that a Peugeot 106 is not a car for a man's feet. I was walking around Cambridge to find this place where the car was, and on the paper, on the pavement, I found this Bible. And I picked it up and I opened it at random, and the passage was highlighted. And it said, "Behold, I give unto thee the power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means harm you." To date, nothing has. So far, when I started doing this in 2006, I was the only one who reported treason across the country. And I'm still chasing it. But since then, and we know from a man called Joe Scanlon, I don't know if he's here today. Are you here today, Joe? No? Joe Scanlon went into Bury St Edmunds police station recently to report the treason. And the policeman behind the counter was quite nice, and he said to him, he said, this is interesting. He said, "I don't know anything about this. Where can I find out about treason?" So he gave him my website. And he went away and he played with the police's computer, and he got on the internet and he looked up my website. He came back and he said, "This is really interesting. This is a national project." And Joe said, "Well, yes, it is." And he said, "Well, hold on a minute, I'll go on the police national computer and see what I can find." And guess what? We're on the police national computer. Treason has now, we believe, been reported in over 70 police stations nationwide. Policemen are no longer laughing when we walk in to report treason. They are now looking for all sorts of reasons, none of which are genuine and workable, for why they shouldn't do it. Because our police force, not the ordinary copper on the ground, but our police force from Chief Inspector and above are all political appointees, and they're all doing the job they're told to do, and they are all resisting this because they all work for government to try and keep government in office. Now, Roger went to Birkenhead, and he had 600 people of courage who went up there. I'm going to ask those 600 people to actually, because we know they've got the courage for their convictions, to now go into police stations and report the treason. Because I said, when I started this, that I wanted to cover 25% of the police stations in the country, And we worked that out as about 900 police stations, but we've already done 70. If you lot go in and you all report it, that's 670 police stations. We're well on our way. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do. And if you weren't at Birkenhead, I'm going to ask you to go in and report treason anyway. Because this is a war of attrition. It is a war which is going to end up with one of two outcomes, in my opinion. One, we are going to be able to force the police into upholding the law, in which case we hang an awful lot of politicians and civil servants over the last 35 years, and we get our country back. The alternative, in my view, does not bear thinking about, but I believe it is a real probability, and that is that people will walk into Parliament with guns and just shoot everybody in sight.
I'm surprised it hasn't happened already.
Well, put to me a couple of scenarios whereby it could happen, and I look at these scenarios and I say, well, that is so bloody simple it can't possibly fail. Because simple is good. I like simple. Simple is good. There's nothing can go wrong with simple. It's convoluted, complicated plans that go wrong. And what government are doing is convoluted and complicated. They are trying to work a new world order system onto us. And what they are trying to do is to take over this country and give it away to a one world, new world government, largely comprised of people with more money than they ever are going to be able to spend if they live for the next 1,000 years. It is to do with greed. I want gimme, 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 gimme. The average working person doesn't have that complex. The average working person will help somebody if they're in trouble. But every time we look around now what government are doing, government are actually obstructing what people can do. They are talking about now doing something with the housing benefits so that disabled people will lose their homes. That is criminal. Absolutely criminal. I was sent a copy of a Hansard report, which took place this year, in March, where they were discussing the fact that the courts are actually making orders which prevent Parliament, people talking to their Member of Parliament about the fact that they are losing their children. And the politicians, in fact, were discussing this, and they decided that for the courts to do this is unconstitutional and a breach of parliamentary privilege, because we all have to have the right to talk to our Member of Parliament. And of course our Members of Parliament are 100% right when they say that. But they then went on to say that the Bill of Rights guarantees it, because it's parliamentary privilege, and under the Bill of Rights that is sacrosanct and can't be touched. And then one of these Members of Parliament talked about the High Court of Parliament. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, I'm going to write you a letter. So I wrote him a letter, and I pointed out to him that the Bill of Rights is a double-edged sword. Because if Parliament and our politicians are using the Bill of Rights in order to prevent them being sent to prison for stealing our money, it isn't working. There's one or two going, not enough, there's one or two going. And if the Bill of Rights protects their privileges to actually have access to their constituents, that's fine. No problem with that whatsoever. But the Bill of Rights says that you cannot be detained unless you have been found guilty of an offence in a court of law. And the Anti-Terrorism Act in its 42-day detention is contrary to the Bill of Rights. It says that you cannot suffer any fine or forfeiture unless you have been found guilty in a court of law. But parking tickets, you don't get near a court of law. Parking tickets are made under statute law, and statute law cannot be used to repeal by implied repeal a constitutional law. Parliament are ruling outside of the rule of law, but they've done more than that. I get a lot of people saying to me, of course the Queen is guilty of treason, you know, we've got to hang the Queen. And I say, no, we don't. And there are two reasons for that. The first is, I don't believe that she is guilty of treason, and I'll explain why in a moment. But the main reason is, whether she is guilty of treason or not, the vast majority of these people in this country think a great deal of Queen Elizabeth. And if we make any move against Queen Elizabeth, we shoot ourselves in the foot because we lose the support of the very people that we need on our side. Now, up until Queen Anne, all of our politicians, when they had a parliament, had a king sitting in the House of Lords, because our kings used to sit in the House of Lords for normal debates. Not every debate, but quite a large number. And our kings would also attend cabinet meetings. So our kings and our queens, the last one to do this was Queen Anne, had their finger on the pulse of what was going on and were able to actually determine which way the country was going to go by simply saying in Parliament or in Cabinet, I don't like that idea, I think it's a bad idea, I'm not going to give it a word of sense, so don't even bother asking. But once Queen Anne died in 1714, we got King George I. Now King George I of Hanover did not speak a word of English, he spoke German very well and a little Latin badly. So he didn't bother to attend cabinet meetings or go to the House of Lords, because he'd waste time, he wouldn't understand a word that was going on. When he died and George II came to the throne, he did speak English and he wanted to go to cabinet meetings and to sit in the House of Lords, and was advised by his government that he couldn't do that. When George III came to the throne, he suffered for quite a large portion of his life with a mental illness brought about by his illness palfrey. So he didn't go into Parliament or the Cabinet because he was locked up in a palace as a sanitarium because he kept jumping on passing young ladies. Now, in 1910, Asquith put a money bill through Parliament to give everybody in the country a pension when they retired. And what they did, they put that up to the House of Lords, and the House of Lords looked at the amount of money they were asking for tax from every working man in the country, and they decided the tax bill was too expensive for the working man to afford. So they rejected it. So Asquith went away, and he came back to the House of Lords and said, I'm going to put a bill before Parliament to limit your powers. And the Lord said, well, we won't give it your cent, it won't go anywhere. And he said, well, in that case, I'm going to put 500 new peers into the House, and they will all vote for the abolition of the House of Lords, and we'll get rid of the House of Lords. And so he put through his 1911 Parliament Act, and the House of Lords actually passed it. Had I been in the House of Lords, I'd have said, come on lads, off we go, and we'd have gone down to Buckhouse, we'd have picked the king up by the nuts, and we'd have said to him, you will not sign these letters patent when they're placed in front of you, because if they can't get their letters patent, they're not Lords, they're not in the House of Lords, they can't destroy the constitutional makeup. But the House of Lords caved in. And they took the 1911 Parliament Act to King Edward VII, and King Edward VII said, I'm not signing this. It's unconstitutional and it removes a protection for my subjects. Shortly thereafter, Edward VII died, and I have written to the Commissioner and said I'd be very interested in the toxicology on the post-mortem on Edward VII. It's a policeman thing, you know. It's a policeman thing. And then, when George V came to the throne, he was met by a government minister, and he was told, you keep all of your prerogatives, but you cannot use any of them unless you have the backing of a government minister, which is worthless, because it means he can't use any of them, because no government minister is going to put a bill through Parliament and then tell the king he can reject it if he wants to. So ever since then, our kings and our queens have been in a position, whatever they swear on their coronation oath, that they have been educated to believe, and Queen Elizabeth II was educated in constitutional law by a man called Henry Martin, who was a Fabian, as was Asquith, and what they do is they come along and they taught her constitutional law, but they did not teach her the power and the authority she actually had. Parliament today say that the Bill of Rights of 1689, when they acknowledge it, they only ever acknowledge its existence when it's giving rise to an argument in their favour. The Bill of Rights of 1689 transferred power from the Crown to Parliament. And yet I have a very old book written by a professor of constitutional law. My copy was written, or reprinted, my copy, in 1896. It was of a book he wrote at least 20 years earlier. And in that book, Professor Taswell Langmead, who was Professor of English History and Constitutional Law at the University of London, University College London, he said that the Bill of Rights placed the powers of the king back to where they were before the Stuarts and the Tudors usurped the crown. Now that takes it back to our last Plantagenet king. And our last Plantagenet king had tremendous power if he wanted to use it. And Parliament say today, we rule by Henry VIII powers. Who knows what they are? Anybody know what they are? Henry VIII powers. King Henry VIII had a bishop called the Bishop of Rochester, who was a mate of his. The Bishop of Rochester upset his cook, one Richard Rose. Richard Rose poisoned the meal and 17 people died, and Henry VIII simply ordered that Richard Rose be taken to Smithfield Market and boiled alive, and that's what happened. Henry VIII was an arrogant bully, and in Henry VIII's day, Henry VIII's powers were illegal. But he was an arrogant bully and nobody would stand up to him. And if they did, they found themselves out of a job or dead. Now, Parliament today claim that they have these Henry VIII powers, and they evidence this by saying we could pass a law which says that all blue-eyed baby boys born in June or July have to be killed. That's the extent of our power. We could do whatever we like. But there are things into our Constitution and in the Bill of Rights of 1689 which actually forbid the sovereign from doing a lot of things. And the sovereign under our constitutional laws and the Bill of Rights would not be allowed to kill all blue-eyed baby boys because they happen to have blue eyes and were born in June and July. And what the Queen cannot do, because the Constitution says she cannot do, Parliament obviously cannot do, because everything they do is done in the Queen's name. So basically, what we have is a Parliament that is running out of order. And what we need to do is to get them back. And the easiest and quickest and most effective way, short of a gun, to do that is to make sure that enough people go into the police stations to report the treason, that the police force are under such colossal pressure from the general public that they are forced to actually take the treason seriously and stop trying to get around it and start doing what we pay them to do, which is no more and no less than to uphold the law of this country the way it is written. If those 600 people who went to Birkenhead walk into police stations to report treason, we are now up to 670 police stations. I said I wanted to start out 4 years ago 900 police stations. We could achieve that quite easily. We could achieve that quite easily. And when the policeman in the police station tells you to get lost, you put a complaint in. And that means there will be 670 complaints going in against policemen. And when they get chucked out, you put complaints in writing to your chief constable about why it's not being done, and then that gets chucked out, and then you go and report your police force to your next police force across the border for the criminal offence of compounding treason. We do that 670 times. That gives the police service a really bad, serious problem. That is what I'm asking you to do. Take ownership of a little bit of the fight back. We know you can do it. We know you can do it. It's been done 70 times already, and we know people have gone up to Birkenhead. People are doing it in other courts with different people other than Roger around the country. We know you can do it. I am asking you, if you want your country back, please go out and report treason. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday, Albert. Well, it's 45. An interesting thing about going into the police station and reporting these crimes is that as I believe it, they want to get an improvement, don't they? So there's one they could do and get a big hit. One of our guys he was actually arrested. 9 police turned up at his door, 5 o'clock in the morning. He didn't have a clue what they were there for, and it turned out that he was being arrested for harassment of council officials because he was writing to them about council tax. Now that is extraordinary, isn't it? 9 police, 3 vans, harassment because he was writing to the council about not paying his council tax. The amusing aspect of this story is that when he got to the police station, there were 2 young police constables, 2 young lady police constables, and they were going to interview him. He said, well, before you interview me, I'm just going to ask a question, just one question, just a yes or no answer will do. Is that all right? And they said, well, yeah. And he said, well, do you know Article 45 of Magna Carta? And they said, no. And he said, well, it says, all constables should know their law and uphold it. We're not getting off to a very good start, are we? How are you going to uphold the law if you don't know the law that says you have to uphold the law?